So today's video is about image sizes in lag and SL, and I'm making it public and encouraging you to share it because it's very important to me. And I've made a chart here, and we're going to discuss the pixel dimensions that can be imported into SL. And I'm not going to get into what a pixel is and bits and bytes and whether things are on off in binary and all that. You can Google that if you're seriously interested in it, but I don't want this class to be 3 hours long. And we're going to discuss the file sizes they take up and what uses, and these are just suggestions on uses and helpful guide to reduce lag, because we all want that, don't we? Okay, so first we're going to start with the 1 by 1, which is the smallest image. This can't be imported into SL, but that essentially defines the smallest image in the world. I'm not going to bother with file size or uses because it can't be imported into SL. Okay, so 4 by 4 is the smallest image that we can have in SL. If I were to take a 1 by 1 and import it into SL, it'll turn it into a 4 by 4. So that's the smallest thing we can get. And it takes up 96 kilobytes on the hard drive. And we'll discuss the differences between the hard drive size and SL size when we get down toward the end of the chart. And the good uses for this are plain textures that have no pattern at all, and very, very simple patterns like a dot. Okay, I've seen many people use 512s and even 1024s that are just plain textures, and this is so wrong. I will show you by making a new file. And let's make it, let's just go ahead and make an 8 by 8. And it's going to be tiny on there. But let's take a 4 by 4 selection here. Whoa. Oops. Alright, let's just make a fixed size here. Fixed size. And let's make a 4 by 4. Okay, there we go. And we're going to fill that. And you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4 pixels. And we can fit not 2 of them like you would think, but 1, 2, 3, 4 of them in this image. So an 8 by 8 is actually 4 times the size of a 4 by 4. And that's important. That becomes especially important later when we get into the fact that 512 is 1/4 the size of a 1024. So anyway, let's go on. 8 by 8s are a very simple image as well. They're only 236 bytes. Could be used for very simple patterns and tiny particles. Now, particles are a whole thing in themselves. You get they have to render on the fly, and the more of them, the larger they are, the more lag. You can't expect to throw thousands of giant particles at people and actually have them see it. SL is an open system, and most video games are designed in a closed system, which means that they know what the end user is going to be using as far as hardware equipment. And we don't know that in SL, so we have to bring it down to an average for the poor people that don't have beefy computers. So it's a good idea to keep your particles as tiny as possible if you want people to actually see them and you want people to enjoy their SL experience. So 16 by 16 is 812 bytes on the hard drive. Good for simple patterns and I meant to say small particles, not tiny particles, but you get the idea. 32 by 32 is 3.04 kilobytes. Good for larger patterns and small particles. 64 by 64. Good for small jewels. Too many people make all their jewelry textures 1024, and there's no reason for that. You can't possibly expect people to see them, especially like in a crowded club or whatever. Okay, 128 is 48 kilobytes. And guess what? 128s are really good for eyes and pretty good for fingernails, medium jewels, and large particles, very large particles. I'm going to show you in world with an avatar that I put on. I'm making a special avatar for this lesson that one of the eye textures is 512, like most eye textures are. I'm dismayed to find out. And one of my eyes will be 128, and I guarantee you'll have a hard time telling the difference between the two. So there's really no reason that eye textures should be 512 and throw that much at people's video cards. 256 is 192 kilobytes. Good for large jewels, small objects under 2 meters. That's just approximation and it's subjective. It's just a suggestion. And jumbo particles, really, this is probably about the biggest that particles should really be if you expect to have them en masse and actually be seen without a bunch of lag. And true, you can throw a pre-reser in there, and we'll be doing those in class, and I'll show you all about that too. But it's really better just to keep the particles as small as you possibly can and still see them and have the detail you need. And frankly, that goes for all textures. A 512 is close to a megabyte, 768K, close to a megabyte, and that's before SL sizes it, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And it's good for most AVI parts, skin, clothing, most things between 2 and 10 meters, larger objects, not huge objects, but things between buildings up to about 10 meters. Event booths should really be no more than 512s. And then our good old 1024, which is the biggest size that SL will import currently. And there's been much talk about bigger, but we'll go into that too. And it's 3 megabytes if you don't have an alpha channel. An alpha channel adds another 8 bits and therefore increases the file size. I'll show you that next. They're very good for sim landscaping, large buildings, very, very detailed clothing. Like I have, I'll show you in the lesson on local textures. I have a piece of clothing with detailed lace on it, and a 512 just isn't going to cut it for that particular thing. But it took a lot of resizing and testing to find that out. And because I'm responsible about my texturing. And as again, you'll see that lesson later. Usually most clothing should be about 512 if it doesn't have insane detail on it. And then we have our 1024 plus an alpha channel, which we were talking about, like if you do plants and they have an invisible background, that's going to add an alpha channel, and it's going to take it up to 4 meg before what's called MIP mapping. And that is when SL imports images exactly like how we see prims at different sizes at different distances. SL does that with our textures too. And when you import an image, it will also create the same image at all possible sizes and attach that to an image. That's called bitmapping. And lets you, if you're all the way across the sim, lets you see that plant with maybe a 4x4 texture, just to know that it's there. But those get included in the texture, and they increase your file sizes inside SL by 33%. And I will provide a link for detailed information on the wiki about bitmapping for those who want to really take a look at that. And 2048 is the biggest SL will import, but it will change it to a 1024, and it'll scale it down. And in a different lesson, we'll talk about image resizing and what that does to your images and why that makes them blurry, even when you're scaling by a factor of 2, which is the best way to go. And I want you to remember that images don't always need to be square. They can be ratios. You can have 8 by 32 or 64 by 256, and that'll decrease your file size dramatically. Make sure a lot of people can see it better. It will render faster, and you'll give you the same amount of detail in many cases. And again, we'll get into details in the local uploading lesson. So we need to remember that this only represents one single image, all these things. And SL throws a lot of images at our video cards, more than most games. And we need to remember that SL is, in effect, a video game. And as we're developing it, we need to understand that when we get on a sim and we get a zillion avatars on there with their clothes, jewelry, hair, the room itself, furniture, decor, if you're outside, the landscaping, possibly a sim surround, you could be getting thousands of textures thrown at your video card. And the same people that are always demanding 1024s or even bigger sizes, there's a lot of talk, let's have even 4096s come in. These same people are the ones that complain most about the lag. And we need to remember, as responsible video game designers, that we need to be efficient in our file sizes. And that is it. Thank you.